My name is Emily. 2 years ago, I thought I was on top of the world. I had a fresh business degree in my hand, a stack of glowing references, and what I thought was my dream marketing job at Brandline Media. The office on the 34th floor overlooking the entire city smelled like ambition and expensive coffee. It was the kind of place where everyone wore sharp suits and sharper smiles, and the air crackled with a relentless, thrilling energy. I thought I'd made it. I thought I belonged. I started as a junior analyst, a small cog in a giant, gleaming machine. My manager was a woman named Samantha Blake. She was everything I aspired to be, confident, articulate, and effortlessly stylish. She moved through the office with the grace of a panther, her heels clicking a rhythm of authority on the polished floors. She had a perfect smile, and every word she spoke was wrapped in layers of sugar and strategy. In my first week, she took me for coffee and laid out the rules of survival. "Never just do your job, Emily," she'd said, stirring her latte without ever breaking eye contact. "That's what the mediocre people do. Here you have to make sure someone important is watching while you do it." At first I thought it was brilliant advice, a secret key to the corporate kingdom. I hung on her every word. I saw it as mentorship, a guiding hand showing me the ropes. Looking back, I realize it wasn't advice, it was a warning. I poured everything I had into that job. I wasn't just the first one in and the last one out. I lived and breathed analytics. I'd spend my evenings teaching myself new software, my weekends reading marketing journals. I didn't just complete my assignments, I looked for problems nobody else saw. I found broken reports from other departments, reports that weren't even my responsibility, and I fixed them in my own time. I'd find a flaw in the data stream, trace it back to its source, and rebuild it from the ground up, leaving a clean, efficient process in my wake. Samantha loved that. My extra work, my quiet competence, it made her numbers shine like polished diamonds. She'd stroll past my desk, her expensive perfume lingering in the air, and murmur, "You're a lifesaver, Emily," with that perfect smile. Then, in the big Monday morning meeting, she would present my work as her own breakthrough. She would stand at the head of the conference table, using the exact phrases and insights I had shared with her, and she would soak up the praise from the executives. But I didn't care, not then. I was young and naive, and I believed in the simple, honest power of good work. I thought that eventually the truth would rise to the surface. I believed that talent and dedication spoke for themselves, and that my voice would eventually be heard. Until it didn't. It was a Tuesday afternoon, I remember, with rain lashing against the floor-to-ceiling windows. We were on the final leg of a massive campaign for a new energy drink, and the pressure was immense. Samantha called me into her glass-walled office. She looked stressed, her smile a little tighter than usual. "Emily," she started, gesturing to a presentation on her screen, "I need you to polish this up before the board meeting tomorrow morning. Just give it your magic touch." I sat down and she walked me through the slides. They were a mess of confusing charts and optimistic, unsupported claims, but the real problem was the core data. The campaign's initial launch numbers were, to put it mildly, disappointing. We were falling far short of our targets. Her presentation, however, told a different story. It was filled with inflated projections and cherry-picked metrics that painted a picture of wild success. "Samantha, these numbers, they're not accurate," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "The engagement rate is less than half of what you've put here. We can't fake the data." She smiled, a patient, condescending little smile. "Emily, everyone polishes. We're not faking it, we're optimizing it for the audience. We're showing them what could be based on a more positive interpretation. Just make it sparkle." My stomach turned. This wasn't polishing, it was lying. It was a deliberate misrepresentation that could cost the company millions when the house of cards came tumbling down. I thought about my ethics classes in college, about the promises I'd made to myself about the kind of professional I wanted to be. I refused. I told her as respectfully as I could that I wasn't comfortable manipulating the results. I said it went against company policy and my own principles. The temperature in the room dropped by 20 degrees. Her smile vanished, replaced by a cold, hard glare I'd never seen before. She took the file from me with a sharp click of her mouse and said, "Fine, I'll handle it myself." A week later, the campaign tanked. The client was furious, the numbers were a disaster, and the board demanded answers. They convened an emergency meeting, and when they asked Samantha what went wrong, she didn't hesitate for a second. With the whole executive team staring at her, she folded her hands on the table and said, with practiced sincerity, "Emily was in charge of analytics for this project. The projections I presented were based entirely on her data." That's how I learned that loyalty doesn't protect you, silence doesn't save you, and good work on its own means nothing if someone with more power decides to erase you. Security escorted me out that afternoon. It was the most humiliating experience of my life. Two large men walking beside me as I carried a cardboard box with my sad little desk plant, a coffee mug and a few notebooks. I remember the weight of the box in my hands and the way my colleagues stared, their faces a mixture of pity and fear before quickly looking down at their keyboards. No one spoke. No one made eye contact. Samantha didn't even look up from her desk as I walked past her office for the last time. I went home to my tiny apartment, sat on the floor, and read the termination letter over and over until the words blurred. Failure to meet ethical standards. The irony was so bitter it almost made me laugh. I was fired for having the very standards they accused me of lacking. For months my life was a downward spiral. The industry is big, but it's also a small, gossipy town. Rumors move faster than resumes. I'd get interviews and everything would be going great until the hiring manager would ask, "So, can you tell us why you left Brandline?" I'd try to explain, but I could see the shift in their eyes. They'd see a disgruntled employee, a problem, a risk. The doors would close one by one. The rejection chipped away at the version of myself I used to be. The confident, ambitious young woman was replaced by someone who was anxious and filled with self-doubt. I started freelancing just to stay afloat, taking on small, boring data entry jobs that paid next to nothing. It was soul-crushing work. But it paid the rent, barely. Then one morning, after nearly a year of scraping by, I got an email that made my heart stop. It was from a company called Crosspoint Communications. "We're looking for consultants experienced in crisis data recovery," it read. "We received your name as a referral from Brandline HR." Brandline, Samantha's company. My first instinct was to delete it. It felt like a trap, a sick joke. But then a strange, cold curiosity took over. Why would they refer me? Maybe it was a mistake, or maybe, just maybe, someone there knew the truth and felt a pang of guilt. I didn't know whether to laugh or scream, but I needed the money. Desperately, so with a deep breath and a sense of dread, I said yes. It turned out that Crosspoint was in the final stages of a massive merger with Brandline Media. They needed a neutral third-party consultant to come in and clean up the transition data, to merge two enormous, messy systems into one. It was a complex, thankless job that nobody wanted. I was the perfect fit. A ghost from Brandline's past, hired by a company that didn't even realize I was the scapegoat they had created 2 years ago. When I walked into the Crosspoint building for the first time, I felt a strange sense of déjà vu. The air of controlled chaos, the whisper of competition, the same smell of expensive coffee. It was a different company, a different logo on the wall, but it was the same breed of predators in the same expensive suits. On my first day, while being given a tour of the office, I saw her. Same perfect hair, same tailored dress, same cloying perfume, just a new employee badge clipped to her blazer. Samantha Blake. She was a senior director now, a prize acquisition in the merger. She turned a corner, saw me, and for a split second her composure shattered. She froze, her eyes wide with a flicker of pure panic. Then just as quickly the mask was back in place. She forced a bright, brittle smile. "Emily. Wow. Long time." I felt a cold calm settle over me. I wasn't the scared junior analyst anymore. I looked her right in the eye and said, "Not long enough." She let out a sharp, nervous laugh, but her eyes didn't join in. For the next few weeks I played my part. I was polite in the hallways. She tried to make small talk by the coffee machine, but I could see it, the flicker of unease that never quite left her eyes. She didn't know what I was doing there or what I wanted. The past wasn't buried, it was sitting at a desk down the hall, waiting. I worked silently, putting my head down and focusing on the monumental task ahead. I was rebuilding corrupted databases, tracing tangled lines of data, and making sense of years of digital chaos. My name wasn't on any press release, and I liked it that way. I was a ghost in the machine, invisible and underestimated. Then, late one Thursday night, I noticed something strange. A series of duplicate invoices from a vendor I didn't recognize. A handful of reversed payments that were perfectly balanced by new entries, making them almost impossible to spot. They were tiny errors, hidden in the digital noise of the merger, but they didn't look like mistakes. They looked intentional. They looked like someone was carefully, systematically laundering money through the merger's chaotic accounts. I started keeping notes, quietly, carefully. I created a password-protected file on a personal, encrypted thumb drive. Every night I stayed late, long after everyone else had gone home, the office silent except for the hum of the servers. I knew those patterns of deception too well. They were the same kind of tricks Samantha used to hide false data in her reports, the same digital sleight of hand. Only this time the numbers were bigger and the scheme felt more coordinated. The more I dug, the clearer the picture became. This wasn't a one-person job. The trail led through multiple departments, crossing paths with project codes and authorization signatures that all pointed in one direction. Samantha wasn't just a pawn in this, she was a key player, a gatekeeper for a much larger operation. And that's when the cold, horrifying realization hit me. My downfall hadn't been an accident. It wasn't just a case of a bad manager throwing her subordinate under the bus to save herself. It had been planned. They needed to discredit the one person who was good enough at her job to spot the irregularities they were planning to hide. They needed a scapegoat ready before the crime was even committed. The merger had simply brought the same rot from Brandline and planted it under a new logo. I could have quit, I could have walked away with what I knew and tried to forget about it, but I didn't, because I realized revenge wasn't about shouting "I told you so" in a meeting. It was about evidence, it was about precision, it was about patience. I built a file I called Glasshouse. Every corrupted data trail, every falsified signature, every suspicious timestamp went into it. I worked methodically, cross-referencing everything, building an airtight case brick by digital brick. I told no one. I smiled in meetings. I nodded at Samantha's fake compliments about how well the data integration was going. She thought she had buried me 2 years ago, but I was just quietly building the shovel. I waited for the right moment, for the one piece of evidence that would tie it all together, and when the moment finally came, I was ready. People think revenge ends when the bad guys lose their jobs and get walked out of the building with their own cardboard box, but sometimes that's just the beginning, because power doesn't vanish, it just hides. After the firings, Brandline, now Crosspoint, looked clean, or so I thought. My Glasshouse file was a masterpiece. I presented it not to the board but to a trusted contact I had made in the legal department. The fallout was immediate and contained. Samantha and a few of her cronies were quietly terminated. There was no public scandal, just a swift internal cleansing. Everyone called me the merger miracle. Clients who had been affected by the fraud sent flowers and gift baskets to my desk. My inbox was filled with emails of congratulations, but something still felt off. The books looked too perfect now, too balanced, like someone had come in after the storm and expertly ironed all the wrinkles out of reality. It was the lack of chaos that worried me. One night, while cleaning up some old project files as part of my new expanded duties, I stumbled upon a transfer chain that didn't match anything in the official ledger. It was a series of small, seemingly insignificant amounts, hidden in plain sight as consulting fees, routed through an outside vendor called Blue Trace Consulting. I'd never heard of them. I ran a quick search on their business registration. Their tax ID matched a holding company owned by one man, Thomas Hale, Brandline's old chief financial officer, and now the CFO of the newly merged Crosspoint. I leaned back in my chair and whispered to the empty office, "You've got to be kidding me." Hale was the one who had signed off on my promotion 2 years ago. He was the one who always praised Samantha in meetings. I dug deeper, pulling all-nighters fueled by stale coffee and a burning sense of purpose. I sifted through archived emails, deleted invoices I recovered from the server backups, and hidden contracts buried deep in the system. The picture that emerged was chilling. Hale hadn't just approved Samantha's fake reports, he had ordered them. He had used her projects as camouflage to move real money, testing the system's vulnerabilities. When a major client nearly caught him, he used Samantha to feed me to the wolves, creating a loud, public distraction to protect his real trail. She wasn't the mastermind, she was just the bait. So the revenge I thought was over, the justice I thought I had secured, wasn't done at all. It had barely even begun. I spent the next 2 weeks gathering everything, quietly, precisely. Every night I exported server logs and verified every single transaction. I didn't get angry, I got methodical. There would be no mistakes this time, no room for doubt. Then I baited him. I used my new system access to create a dummy internal project, a ghost initiative with a substantial but not outrageous budget. I called it the EchoReach pilot. I created a fake vendor with a bank account that I controlled, routing the funds through a series of traceable digital hoops. Only 3 people in the entire company had access to the project's financials, Me, the head of accounting, and the CFO, Thomas Hale. 48 hours later, the money moved. A single, clean transfer, straight from the Echo Reach pilot project into the accounts of Blue Trace Consulting. Got him. The next morning I walked into work in a pair of heels that clicked on the marble floor like a countdown. At 10 a.m. the quarterly board meeting started. Hale was already there at the head of the table, smiling his confident, untouchable smile. I sat across from him, opened my laptop and connected to the projector. The file was called Glasshouse. He saw the name on the screen, and for the first time his smile faltered. Integration update Emily, he asked, his voice a little tight. I smiled back. Yes, a final report on full transparency. Slide 1, his own polished performance charts, showing the company's spectacular financial health. Slide 2, the hidden payment trails from the last 2 years, marked in bright, undeniable red. Slide 3, the corporate structure of Blue Trace Consulting, with his name and signature clearly visible as the sole owner. Slide 4, proof of the transfer from my fake project, the one he'd stolen from just the day before, complete with timestamps and IP addresses. The room went absolutely silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Hale tried to speak, his face pale. Emily, I think you've misunderstood. I cut him off, my voice clear and cold. There are no mistakes this time, Mr. Hale. Every single transfer has been verified by the system logs you yourself signed off on. The CEO, a stern man named Mr. Cross, turned slowly to him. Thomas, is this accurate? He stammered for a moment, looking around the room for an ally and finding none. Then something inside him seemed to snap. His fear turned to a strange, arrogant rage. He pointed a finger at me. She wouldn't even be here if it weren't for me. I gave her the push she needed. The room froze. He wasn't even trying to deny it anymore. She was mediocre, a standard analyst with no ambition. I told Samantha to test her, give her a challenge, see if she had what it takes. If she cracked, she didn't belong here. That firing was an evaluation, not cruelty. So that was it. The man who had wrecked my career and my life had done it on a whim, as a test. He had destroyed my reputation and called it a performance review, all while using the chaos to cover his own crimes. I looked him straight in the eye. You sabotaged a loyal employee, laundered millions of dollars of company money, and you're calling it a performance review. No one breathed. The CEO's face hardened into a mask of stone. Security. Hale stood up, knocking his chair over. He pointed at me, his voice filled with venom. You think this makes you a hero? You just tanked your own team, your own company. I didn't raise my voice. I just looked at him and said, no, Thomas, I just proved that integrity isn't negotiable. Security walked him out, his protests echoing down the hall. The CEO turned to me, his expression unreadable. Emily, we all owe you a great debt. I closed my laptop. No debts, just clean books. The next 48 hours were a whirlwind of chaos. Legal teams, forensic accountants, and news crews descended on the building. The headlines were explosive. Junior analyst exposes decade-long CFO fraud. Ex-employee returns to uncover massive corporate scandal. My phone exploded. Recruiters, reporters, and dozens of ex-colleagues I hadn't heard from in years were suddenly my best friends. Even Samantha sent me a one-line text. You win. I deleted it without replying. This wasn't about winning, it was about balance. A few days later, the CEO called me into his office. We're creating a new position, he said. Director of Data Integrity and a spot on the senior leadership team. The job is yours, you've earned it. I smiled a real smile for the first time in a long time. Thank you. When I left the office that evening, I realized the city looked different. The same skyline that once seemed to mock my failure now looked like proof that I could build something lasting. That night I went online and posted one sentence on my professional profile. They fired me to silence the truth. Now the truth signs my paycheck. But deep down I knew the story wasn't finished. Months passed. The company stabilized under my watch. I implemented new systems of transparency, new checks and balances. I became the person people went to when they wanted things done right without any shortcuts. I had a team, I had respect, and I had authority. But ghosts have a way of showing up just when the spotlight hits you. One day, HR forwarded me an application with a note attached. Candidate for senior analyst position, Samantha Blake, referral request from hiring manager. Your opinion would be appreciated. She had applied to one of our smaller satellite divisions. They wanted my opinion as the head of integrity. I opened her resume. She had rewritten her own history, of course. She called herself a senior strategist at her last role, conveniently leaving out the part where she was fired for fraud. I could have ended her career with a single damning email. One word from me and she would be blacklisted. I held her future in my hands just as she had once held mine. But when I looked at the screen, I didn't feel anger. I just felt tired. Revenge isn't about destruction, it's about correction. So I wrote back to the hiring manager. She's talented and strategically sharp, but requires a structured environment with clear accountability. If you hire her, I recommend setting clear checks and balances on her reporting. They did. A few weeks later, Samantha sent me an email. Can we talk? I ignored it. Then another came a few days later. Then simply, please. I finally replied with one line. Samantha, honesty is a good place to start. Keep practicing it. She got the job on a probationary basis. What she didn't know was that every single one of her projects and reports was automatically flagged to be routed through my department for a final review. She was under my microscope. Her first few reports were sloppy, with the same old tricks of puffery and optimistic spin. I sent them back with a list of corrections. No emotion, no commentary, just the cold, hard facts. Source data for this chart is inconclusive. Revise or remove. This projection is not supported by the current metrics. By her fifth project, her work was clean. It was precise, it was careful, it was honest. Then she asked to meet me in person. We met in a sterile, neutral conference room. She looked different, less polished, more human. I wanted to thank you, she said, her voice quiet. You could have ruined me, I know you could have. Instead, you forced me to fix myself. I looked at her, the woman who had once been my mentor and my tormentor. I didn't do it for you, Samantha. I did it because this company doesn't deserve another lie. She nodded slowly. Still, thank you. That day, I realized revenge didn't have to be a fire that burns everything down. Sometimes it could be a quiet, steady form of discipline. A few weeks after that, she nailed a huge client pitch. Her presentation was truthful, sharp, and had no fluff. She won the business on the merit of her work, and the team gave her a round of applause. And for the first time, I saw the person she could have been all along if she hadn't been so desperate to take shortcuts. That night I wrote in my journal, revenge isn't destruction, it's correction. I thought that was the end, I really did, but corruption doesn't die easily, it just changes its name. A year later, the legal department sent me a batch of files for a routine annual audit. As I was scrolling through a list of approved vendors, one name stopped me cold, Blue Trace II Holdings. The same shell company, just with a different face. I pulled up the incorporation documents. The new signature on the bottom line wasn't Thomas Hale. It was our CEO's, Mr. Cross, the man who had promoted me, who had praised me, who had used me as the public symbol of his company's new era of reform. I laughed, a quiet, empty laugh in my silent office. Of course, people don't fix corruption, they just rebrand it. I traced the pattern. It was more sophisticated than Hale's clumsy scheme. There were political donations, offshore accounts, and charity projects that were nothing more than money tunnels, all under his name, all hidden behind a firewall of corporate goodwill. That's when I finally understood the whole ugly truth. I wasn't the avenger, I was the alibi. My story, the story of the analyst who cleaned up the company, was the perfect cover for the CEO to continue the game on a much grander scale. I could have gone public, but a scandal like that doesn't destroy powerful men like him. It just feeds them new disguises and lets them slip away. So I built something better than a scandal. I built proof. This time my work was on a global scale. I tagged every suspicious file. I embedded invisible digital markers in each illegal transfer. Then I waited. 6 months later, the markers lit up like a Christmas tree across 3 continents. I compiled the final report, a complete and irrefutable map of his entire criminal enterprise. I sent it to the Financial Crimes Enforcement Bureau from an anonymous, encrypted email address. The message attached to the file was simple. Integrity is a system, not a slogan. 2 weeks later, the headlines hit. Crosspoint CEO under federal investigation for global embezzlement. When I walked into the office that day, the building was in absolute chaos. Phones were ringing off the hook, lawyers were swarming the executive floor, and panic was etched on every face. I went to my office, left my resignation letter on the desk, and walked out. No speeches, no victory lap, just peace. A few weeks later, a tech startup from California reached out. They were a small, ambitious company that wanted to build ethics-driven data technology, software that would help companies enforce transparency from the inside out. They had read about me, and they asked if I would lead their product division. I said yes. We called it Glasshouse Labs, the same name as the folder on the thumb drive that had started everything. A year after that, I was speaking at a major tech conference. During the Q&A, a journalist stood up and asked, "After everything you've been through, hail Samantha Cross, what drives you now? Is it still revenge?" I smiled. "Accountability," I said. "It's the only revenge that lasts." The crowd clapped, but in my head I thought, "You were right, Samantha. I didn't just do my job, I built the whole damn building." So if anyone ever laughs at you for trying to do things the right way, if they ever tell you to polish the truth, remember this. They're not ahead of you, they're just louder, for now. Because someday, when they've taken all their shortcuts and played all their games, they'll open their inbox and see your name on the approval line. And they'll realize the person they buried became the one holding the shovel. And that's the coldest and quietest kind of justice there is.